Hello everyone, welcome into MLS Digest. I'm Camille here to preview the Week 2 MLS slate coming this weekend, February 1st and 2nd. And Week 1 really delivered. Opening weekend saw 46 goals across the 15-match slate, which is a record for the most goals in the first week of an MLS season. And of course, we hope that continues the rest of the season and we continue to be entertained by all these teams and especially the newcomers, the star attacking talent that has come into this league that already got off to some hot starts in Week 1. If you're interested in a refresher of everything that happened in Week 1 and all the storylines from that, be sure to check out the previous video on this channel, which was a full recap of Week 1 and everything you may have missed. I'll also link it down in the description below. Ahead of match Week 2 as well, there were many MLS sides wrapping up their second legs of the round of 32 of Concacaf Champions Cup, and many of those MLS sides in it advanced to the round of 16, and those first legs of the round of 16 will be played directly after this weekend's MLS Week 2 slate. And so that's going to bring up a bit of schedule congestion that I think will have much more of an effect this coming week and the following weeks if they continue to advance than it did, for the Week 1 slate, because teams are very, very fresh. But now it'll bring up about 3 or 4 games in about less than a 2-week span. And so we're going to have to monitor those situations, but I'll fill you in on every team dealing with that potentially. And of course, get you everything you need to know for specifically, obviously, match Week 2 of MLS, lineups, injuries, and of course, predictions, and a couple best bets for this show. Also, just a reminder, if you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, please consider doing so to help grow the channel, and leave a like on the video below if you're enjoying the content. It really goes a long way, and I always appreciate your support. Saturday's opening game in the early window features a pretty hotly contested rivalry, a growing rivalry, especially in the past couple of seasons with the proximity. It's Charlotte hosting Atlanta, and Charlotte obviously brings back essentially all of its entire roster, now just adding Zaha, getting Pep Biel back. And Zaha finally ready to go for this one after missing out on the Week 1 match. Dean Smith said he's fully ready to go, so we expect to see him starting on that left wing. Charlotte went out and got a 2-2 draw on the road at the Sounders to open 2025, which is a fantastic point to get. It's not easy to get points on the road against the Sounders, especially being an East Coast team, having to travel like that. Maybe not a fully deserved result. They really left it late, and it took a very traumatic own goal from a Sounders perspective to tie it 2-2 in stoppage time. But regardless, it's a great point to pick up. And for Atlanta, they were in an absolute barn burner against Montreal in the home opener. Really back and forth game. Could have honestly went either way, but in the end, Atlanta's quality with all their new attacking pieces, Latte Lath getting 2 goals, Mosquera coming off the bench for the winner, and obviously Almiron as well coming in there. They ended up getting that victory. Now, the issue for Atlanta to start the season is that 3 of its 4 first-choice backline players are out for several weeks, and that includes both the wingbacks, Amador and Brooks Lennon. And we know that they have an all gas, no breaks type of mentality. They really love getting the ball forward with all this new attacking talent. But we saw in that Montreal game, they commit so many numbers forward that if their attacking phases don't really pan out, they can very much be exposed the other way. And so I think with not a first choice back line for the most part, they're going to try and tread water and really try and get on the end of just high scoring games, simply outscoring teams, not really worry about if they ship a goal or 2 each game. But against Charlotte, that might be risky business. Charlotte, of course, we know from last season, was probably the best home team, I think, in terms of least goals allowed. They got so many clean sheets. They would win games 1 or 2-0 and just lock it down. Dean Smith, that is his philosophy, just having a strong spine back there and then getting better, which they did. Now, you would think with Zaha, adding Zaha and getting Pep Biel back on the attacking end, Ajiming finally solidifying that starting striker role. But I don't know if Atlanta can be denied by really any defense in this league with all these new pieces. But it's going to be interesting to see, because I don't think Charlotte as well is going to set up in a style that caters towards the best attacking potential for Atlanta. I think Charlotte's going to give them a lot of the ball rather than make it too transition oriented and try and maybe transition themselves only instead. But I think this will be a highly contested game. In the past 2 seasons, these teams have met twice each, and the away team has won in all 4 of those games the past 2 seasons. I don't think Atlanta, can they definitely have the talent to outright win this game, but I don't think it's going to lend itself to maybe their best strengths, because Charlotte likes to make it tough for teams. And I also think, though, with Zaha's first real start in a competitive game, their attack also might not be clicking on all cylinders, despite the fact that obviously he is an upgrade on that left wing. I think this one ends in a tie. I say 1-1, maybe 2-2, but I'm going to go towards the lower end of things. I say 1-1 between Charlotte and Atlanta. Moving on to the second standalone game of Saturday's slate before we get into the main night slate. It's Real Salt Lake hosting the Sounders, two Western foes, and neither picked up the full 3 points win in week 1, and both actually played in the opening rounds of Champions Cup. So the first leg before the week 1 game they each had, and then the second leg right before this game. The thing is that only one of these teams advanced. RSL lost to Herediano, so they're knocked out, and the Sounders advanced to the round of 16 where they'll face Cruz Azul in a 2-leg tie, the first of those being at home in midweek right after this game. So even though that is a great opponent that they have to obviously plan for, and they, have always been in Champions Cup and like to go, are attempting to go deep into it, at least they get to be at home. They don't have to worry about too much travel, despite the extra, game schedule congestion. Now, where I'm going with my first best bet, as you can see here, it might be a bit of a reverse on what I've been talking about, just due to the additional schedule congestion for the Sounders. I'm going for Sounders draw no bet on plus 105, so we're getting that push protection. And it's for a couple key reasons. Sounders have much better depth than RSL. They also went out and got a couple key attacking players, including Ferreira. And so they also, despite, having to play that midweek game at the same time, the tie was basically already won going into that second home leg because they were up 3-1 and didn't have to expend too much energy. They rotated their squad well. And RSL, on the other end, yes, they're knocked out. Yes, they don't have another game to look forward to right after this. But they've been abysmal, man. And it's no surprise if you've been really paying attention, because this entire attacking core got stripped down, minus Diego Luna. And the replacements have been, the replacements they've spent on, they've not spent much on them. So they've sold high on the players that left and then bought low. And so far, it's just not really panning out from a quality perspective. They don't really have a true 9. They've been shopping around the league, literally asking teams, to try and get a true striker. And that's led to just 1 goal in their first 3 competitive matches of 2025. And yes, they do have the home advantage, the altitude advantage in Salt Lake. But the Sounders, like I said, have rotated well. They have the squad depth. They're coming off what I would think is a frustrating result at home. They should have won that game and held on for that win against Charlotte. And the Sounders as well are a very good defensive team, especially at home. But in general, they were one of the top 5 at least defensive teams last season. They retained that entire back line essentially, and the whole team. They only got better in terms of a squad depth perspective. And they've pretty much been lighting it up to start the season. They scored 3 on the road, like I said, I think in that first leg of Champions Cup round of 32. Then they went and, scored 2 at home. So no issues against Charlotte, who is also obviously one of the best defensive teams in the league, even though they were on the road. And then also another 3 goals in the second leg that they just had against Antigua. So I think we're getting great value here. History hasn't been kind to the Sounders in the past decade or so since they've visited RSL. But I think this is a great spot for them to turn that around. And I don't think RSL wins this one outright. I just don't see it coming together yet. This team is really stripped down to bare bones, and players that really don't have that, same chemistry, same attacking output for RSL. And so I think at worst we get the push here for the Sounders with a draw, but I really like their chances of taking the 3 points. The Revs host the Crew after the Revs were held to a 0-0 draw on the road at Nashville to open 2025. And you could look at that one of 2 ways. The attacking potential is there. They definitely could have done better on putting away a couple of chances in that game, but also defensively to get a clean sheet on the road after the season they had last year, shipping some of the most goals in the entire league, is a positive sign. They return home here, and they do have to face the Crew, which obviously 4-2 win against the Fire to start. A couple of, honestly, goals that the Fire shot themselves in the foot, but regardless, dominated that game, after about the first half an hour, and then eventually ended up getting the lead. And it just looks like a seamless transition into life without Cucho, despite the fact that their squad depth at the moment isn't all that overwhelming. But the players that remain, still with Diego Rossi and Russell Rowe, I mean, Nancy's tactics just are a level above really almost anyone in MLS. And I don't think they're going to have a problem getting past the Revs here. I think they do ship a goal in this one, but they are also in, as well, to mention, Champions Cup. They got a bye into the round of 16, so they didn't play that, round of 32 before. They have a road game, first leg, against LAFC right after this one. So I think their squad depth issues are going to come into play more into going into that game than this, because although they may be looking ahead, they really can't field too much of a different lineup compared to, what they have to work with right now. And so I think they'll still be obviously very fresh with the normal week break between last game and this one. And then they'll have to just worry about, how to manage that in their Champions Cup 2-leg tie. But as for this game, I think despite the fact I'd see better signs, more promising signs from the Revs, already this season. I think the Crew are a level above. I think they beat the brakes off them last year as well in New England, the Crew did. And I think they have a similar sort of result here. I'm going to go 3-1 for the Crew. The Red Bulls host Nashville. Neither got a win in their first game of the season. The Red Bulls lost in a tough game against Cincy where Kevin Denke's goal was the difference. Nashville, like we just talked about in the New England preview, 0-0 draw at home to open the season. And these are two teams that are difficult to get a solid read on. I think they're two very low eventful teams, especially Nashville. Red Bull definitely has the talent gap, and Choupo-Moting's debut was average, I would say, against Cincinnati, but it is Cincinnati, so they played them tightly. And, on another day, maybe they get a point out of that game, but we know what the Red Bulls' philosophy is. Right now, they're pretty much, fully healthy, and they come here into their home opener with, essentially a solid group of guys, same group of guys that made it to the MLS Cup final last season. And the problem is that I don't know what to expect out of this team just at the start of the season so far. I think they definitely have the potential to get a win in this one against Nashville, who is really thin in that midfield. Even though they got some signings, they're really thin at the moment. So I'm not seeing where it's all coming together in terms of that creation for their attacking talent. But the thing with Nashville is that they're going to try and make the pitch very, very narrow. They're not going to limit. They're going to limit space, while Red Bulls are going to press a lot. I think it's going to be a very scrappy game, and this is one where, just like Nashville last game, that had a 0-0, I think this could be potentially another 0-0. But I see the Red Bulls with the talent advantage, and they just have that work and that compete effort levels, over probably 95% of teams in this league. And I think that midfield is going to, have its way with what Nashville has remaining to bring up for this game. And so I think Red Bulls do squeak this one out. They're the healthier side, and they have the talent difference at home. And I'm just not seeing, besides, that type of philosophy from BJ Callahan with making it very narrow and difficult for teams. I'm not really seeing, from an attacking standpoint, how they're going to get past this Red Bull side, who is also very, very good in terms of limiting chances, especially at home last season. And so I'm going to go for a 2-0 Red Bulls win. Orlando hosts Toronto after getting completely embarrassed by the Union 4-2 in their home opener. Meanwhile, Toronto clawed back with a penalty by Bernadeschi to get a 2-2 draw at DC. Not really saying much considering, how terrible DC is likely going to be this season, but regardless, a good point to start the season. But they have to go on the road again here. Orlando gets to stay home. Both of these teams on, normal rest. I was very much monitoring this game for one of my potential best bets because of the fact that I think Orlando is going to bounce back. I'm super low on this Toronto side. good signs for Orlando in terms of Pasalic getting his brace in his debut. The attack was there. It was just that a big part of that chemistry and communication for Orlando defensively was that their captain, Robin Janssen, picked up some sort of knock or pull right in warm-ups or something like that right before the game. So he was ruled out right before the game. And that's a big part of their back line. And they shipped 4 goals on 4 shots allowed, including obviously one terrible mistake from Galese that led to a wide open goal playing out of the back. But that's just not something you're going to see like almost ever out of any team. Scoring for the Union, scored on all 4 of their shots on target. And so I think you just have to put that in the past. And I really like Orlando here anyways. I think Toronto's, talent is very much lacking. Insigne has been practicing, so I think he's good to go here, which would have both their DP wingers available. But they don't have a decent 9 even. That roster regardless is generally just not up to par, I think, with Orlando's. And I think just in general, Orlando turns it around. They have that attacking talent. And the difference for me, I think, in terms of making a bet here, is going to be Janssen's status, because I think he has been training on the side a little bit. But if he's not ready to go, I'm gonna have to really make a decision, before the game starts. So this is one that I'm monitoring for a bet. So be sure to, if you're interested in those potential other bets, I post those on my Twitter at MLS Digest in the hours or so leading up to the game once we know more about the actual lineups. So I think if Janssen does play, I'm definitely locking something in with Orlando. But I think I'm still confident in them to get the win anyways, because Toronto on the road, this defense was terrible. They didn't really do much to get better. And unless Insigne and Bernadeschi are really on their day, which they still could be and maybe get 1 goal, it's really, here and there in terms of how often that happens, and it all comes together for Toronto. Orlando at home was a really, really solid bet the second half of last season. I think that was just a little bit of a blip against the Union, and I'm backing Orlando to win this one. I'm going to go 3-1. The Union hosts Cincy after the Union got a 4-2 dub against Orlando, one of the shock results of week 1. Meanwhile, Cincy also won in its home opener, that should say versus not at, against Red Bull New York. It was a home game. They're on the road here, though. They did have to also deal with Champions Cup congestion, but the tie was also basically over for them after the first leg. They won 4-1 on the road to Motagua, and then a day or two ago, it was a 1-1 game, I believe, in Cincy. Now they move on to the round of 16 and have to face Tigres, one of Liga MX, best teams. The thing is, their first leg there is at home, though, so they don't have to worry about that, extra travel. They go back home for that game, and they do have decent squad depth, so they didn't really, use too much energy in this past second leg the other day, leading up to this match against the Union. And so you would think Denke and Evander are fresh to go from that perspective, from an attacking perspective. Defensively, still not their full first choice, back line there, but still have looked pretty good so far. And for the Union, I mean, it's an impressive first result. It seems like if it can all come together in the attacking phases of play, they have the quality up top to really, convert on even like low kind of XG chances. Like they have some killers up there with that trio that I've always been very high on, but it's really obviously, of course, going to come down to this midfield battle. And this is a good test for Philly coming off that result. I mean, we're really going to see a lot in terms of how to kind of where we could really maybe start putting them, even though it will only be 2 weeks into the season, because I had them missing the playoffs. But we'll see how Bradley Carnell, manages this game. Cincinnati, in terms of the odds for this one, is kind of being disrespected. They're not the favorites, but they're not, huge underdogs. And so I think that's a potential, thing to look at. But I think I want to wait to see this lineup, because they could be looking ahead to that Tigres clash, because, they're going to be expecting to, compete in Champions Cup no matter who their opponent is. So they want to go far as well. So we'll have to see how serious they, take this game. And from that, I think I lean towards a draw here. I'm going to say 1-1. But in terms of a potential bet, again, on the Twitter on game day, I'm probably looking at a potential Cincinnati draw no bet, but I have to see the lineup first. I'm still not going to overreact to that first result for the Union. The Chicago Fire hosts DC United, and neither of these teams picked up 3 points in week 1. Fire lost 4-2 to the Crew after taking the lead twice in the first half. DC as well held to a draw against Toronto after leading 2-1, gave up a penalty. And this was another one where I was really close to firing on the Fire for a potential best bet. I was going to take their team total over 1.5, but there's a big loss for them in this game, and that is the fact that Brian Gutierrez, their young star number 10 cam, is out for this one. He almost picked up a red for kind of a aggressive type of push and elbow, I guess, against a Crew player that I think got rescinded in the match, but then the league reviewed it after and then has suspended him after reviewing everything post-match for this game. And so that's going to be a huge loss for the Fire because although they have other midfielders on the roster, literally only 2 of their first team midfielders are healthy at the moment or available to play, and that's their 2 defensive mids, Acosta and Origel. And so that literally leaves them with having to, based on the reports, have to call up one of their Chicago Fire 2 midfielders to fill in, and obviously also not the full healthy back line with Barroso still injured, one of their young signings, a right back. And so they're still playing Dean back there. And although this attack looked super, super promising against the Crew, it was a lot of because of the fact that Brian Gutierrez was that guy in the middle, helping them in transition, getting them and getting those balls in for especially Bamba in that first half. And so despite the fact that you will have Bamba, Kuipers, Zingernagel, and maybe not even Kuipers for more than a half because he only played a half in the Crew game before being subbed off for the second half because of fitness issues, it's just another hindrance to start the season for the Fire, and they may not be at their best attacking potential once again because who's going to be the guy to actually break the lines and set up this front 3? It's just not very clear that it's going to be at that same level, of course, even though it is a terrible DC United defense. And so I just can't in good faith, actually trust this team to piece it all together, even though it is a terrible DC United team going on the road. And for DC United, still, it's the same plan offensively, going to try and get Benteke aerially involved and pray for the best. I still think the Fire do come out with a win in this one, but hard to really, trust them with your money when, of course, there's something, again, that is keeping them from actually putting it all together in the first couple of weeks of this season. So I'm going to go still, though, with a 2-1 Fire win. Kansas City hosting the Earthquakes in this one, and Kansas City, 3 competitive games so far, including a 2-leg round of 32 Champions Cup tie against Miami, in which now they're knocked out. And they lost their opening MLS match 1-0 on the road to Austin. They've only scored 1 goal in their first 3 competitive matches, and that 1 goal was really an unlucky goal from Miami's standpoint. It came off the back of a defender, a rocket shot that came off the back of the defender, completely deflected the other way that it was supposed to go. And so they've only put up 1.9 expected goals in their first 3 matches, have failed to hit, 1 expected goal in any of their individual matches so far. And although Manu Garcia, the number 10 they signed, has shown a couple of flashes here and there, like I said and have said to start the season, I don't think that's going to be enough for it to all to come together for this KC team because they are very much lacking in other areas. And Joveljic still needs to be unlocked. And the thing is, though, against this Quakes team, despite the fact they won 4-0 against RSL at home, It's an impressive start to the Bruce Arena for sure, but as I've mentioned about RSL, you know, that's a team that, the Quakes, I guess, should be beating, and many teams should be beating this season based on how terrible that roster is constructed at the moment. And they got 3 goals from defenders in that game, the Quakes did, and they still gave up 1.6 expected goals in that game, despite the fact that it was really only Diego Luna providing any threat for RSL in that game. And I still think this defense is very, very leaky. It's most of the guys they brought back from last season. Daniel had a great performance, though, in goal, so that's a big thing for them this season because they had some of the worst goalkeeping metrics in a season in history across the board last season, and so that's a good start for Daniel to earn that starting role. But regardless, I think these two worlds are colliding here. I don't think the Quakes have shown anything too much yet because their actual attack didn't really get going. Their actual attacking core, besides Espinoza providing all those assists, but the strikers still need to show up. And for Kansas City, I think this is maybe one where they're looking at it and saying that this is where they can actually, break their kind of drought to start this season. The Quakes are very vulnerable back there. I just don't see much separating these two sides, though. I think, the Quakes are still going to be very well coached with Bruce Arena, and so I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw in Kansas City. Minnesota hosts Montreal, as neither of these teams picked up even a point in week 1, both going on the road. And I think both were actually super unlucky to not at least pick up a point from their matches. Both look very promising from an attacking standpoint. And in this one, I'm going on the side of Minnesota, actually. And that's where I'm headed for my second best bet. It's going to be a 2-legger, but this is the first leg. And I'm going with Minnesota team total over 1.5 in this game. I think they win this game pretty handily. But this is where, I'm focusing on one side of the ball here. There are some key injuries, one being Rosales, their left back in this kind of 3 or 5 back system that they like to play. He's a big part of that down the left-hand side, and that's going to be a key miss. He's out for about 2 to 3 weeks, but they still have Markinich there, who has played some time there and has been with the team, so that's a thing to note. But on the other side, with Montreal, they're going to be, I'd say 75% chance they're missing these two guys because they have not been training in I think today at the time of this recording they didn't train, or the day before, or have been on the side training and then didn't train the next day. So that's really not a good sign. And those two players are Campbell, one of their center backs, and then also Piet, basically probably their best defensive midfielder and a key part in that. And they're already a super young team, missing Vrioni. Obviously, Owusu did a hell of a job against Atlanta as that striker. But regardless, those are 2 key losses on a team for Montreal that was already one of the worst, if not the worst, I think, in terms of their chances and goals given up on the road, especially last season. And they bring back basically the same group under Courtois. And I think what we saw from the Atlanta game as well is that they're not just going to sit back and, try and fight for these scrappy points on the road. I think they're going to bring it to teams and could get in shootouts as well, especially on the road. But they're also going to be very open defensively. I like Minnesota's attack, even if Rosales is missing to support that left-hand side. They still have Yeboah, Pereira. Lud didn't even start last game, so we're going to see how they kind of rotate him into there because he's a fantastic creative player for them. And I just love Minnesota at home. I like what they're building with this under Ramsey, and I think they should win this game pretty handily, but I'm only going to worry about one side of the ball. And I think 2 goals for them at home against this Montreal side is essentially almost a given. But Montreal, I think they're going to be in that type of attitude. Even if they're missing these players, even though they are so young, I think that's going to lend itself still to maybe a back and forth game. And so while 2 goals probably should still be enough for Minnesota to win this, and I think they even get 3, I'm predicting a 3-1 scoreline. For the best bet, for this first leg, I'm just going to trust them to get 2 goals at home. It's going to be a great environment in front of that Wonderwall, and they should have no problem probably beating Montreal. Moving on to the Timbers hosting Austin, and this is going to be the second leg of our second best bet. And I'm going with Austin to simply score at least one goal in this game. And that brings, with the Minnesota team total over 1.5 to plus 104 combined odds. And I'm going to trust this Austin side. We took them last week. They got the win 1-0. Eventually broke through that, stubborn KC side that didn't really offer much defensively. But this is kind of in both senses two teams I'm targeting for different reasons. Austin has a revamped attack, and they're actually getting Uzuni for this one finally. He's set to go for this one. Their big signing on the left-hand side, who couldn't feature in the first match. Meanwhile, the Timbers are a complete mess. They got completely embarrassed again against Vancouver 4-1 at home. Yes, they host again here, but I think, like I said, without Evander, we're going to have to see what Da Costa does. He did feature for a little bit there, but now he's finally going to start this match. So while they definitely can't score at home, they saw some of the best, highest both teams to score rates in the entire league last year at home. But I'm more so trusting this Austin side. I think they have especially the better defense, and right now just the better team and healthier team. They're basically fully healthy with Uzuni finally joining the fold, and the Timbers still missing Jonathan Rodriguez, Santiago Moreno, and Kamal Miller on that red, who got that red against Vancouver, who's probably their best defender, but also really isn't saying much on a really bad back line. And they're still just stubbornly playing the same exposed system, despite the fact of all these pieces missing with Evander leaving, and they're going to be very, very open. And I think that is gonna. I honestly almost think Austin can pull off another upset here. I'm not really understanding the odds for the plus money odds they are for how big of an underdog they are, and so I lean towards them to even win in this one. I could have taken both to score, but at the same time, this Timbers attack is still very, not going to be on the same wavelength, and not full strength. So while they probably can get one in, I just don't see how they, handily, even if they do win this game, if they really are convincing. I see Austin at least getting a point out of this one, and they had success last year in Portland. And it really doesn't take much to get through this Timbers team, especially with how this tactically under Neville, they just have not changed their philosophy. And so I think Austin's going to have a field day, and I think one goal is not too much to ask out of this team. The Rapids host Dallas in the Rapids home opener. They already played at home a competitive match for that Champions Cup round of 32 against LAFC, where they won 2-1, but earlier this week, they lost the reverse leg in LAFC just 1-0, which made them lose on away goals, since Champions Cup still uses that. And so they're out of Champions Cup very, very early, of course. And it might be a good thing for them. I don't think they were going to make it all that far anyways, considering the path they would have had to take. They would have faced the Crew next, and then Miami, and so on. And so I think it's a good thing for this team. I think that last match against St. Louis was probably one of the worst we've ever seen them under Chris Armas, especially on the road. Just the result I was completely not expecting. They didn't even muster a single shot on target, and they also were pretty much full strength, which I was not expecting these players to recover all that fast. And it just looked like they were completely looking ahead to that second leg at LAFC, because they were trying to advance and be fresh as possible for that. But it didn't end up doing them any good, because they literally were shut out in their first MLS game against St. Louis, and then shut out at LAFC and knocked out. So I think it's only up from here for Colorado. I'm still very high on them, of course. But the good thing is that they're very, very healthy. They might be feeling some knock-on effect in terms of an emotional letdown from losing that game against LAFC, and just really not rotating at all, basically, in terms of that first team squad for the past 2 or 3 games. But they get to host Dallas, and Dallas did pick up a win on the road against the Dynamo to start the season, a great win in the Texas Derby, but another road game here for them back-to-back in the altitude. And I'm still not obviously sold on this Dallas defense. Yes, this attack is super almost elite with the players they have, but Dallas was gifted a couple chances there in that Dynamo game, which of course they took advantage of, and that's a good sign for them. But I don't see them, you know, really contending with the Rapids here unless the Rapids really come out flat because of just a couple extra games that they've had to play. But it's still so early that I think the Rapids are going to bounce back here. And I say that they get this one done 2-0. LAFC at home against NYCFC. LAFC won its opening match in MLS against Minnesota, and then they also, like we just talked about, beat the Rapids in Champions Cup action after a tight second leg, but they got through on those away goals. And next up they have, after this weekend's game, the round of 16 against the Crew. The first leg is going to be at home for LAFC, so including that Crew game, they're going to have 3 matches in a row at home, so they get to, not have to travel so much and don't really have to look ahead too much, because of that. Yes, they might rotate a little bit, but they have the depth enough for it, especially in that back line in midfield. And Bouanga, of course, like I've talked about every time, is never not missing a game almost, no matter what. NYCFC on the other end, they were up 2-1 and up a man for over an hour, especially against Miami, and were really the worst team since then and gave up a late goal to only tie in Miami, despite obviously having that extra man and the lead for half an hour. And so it's still a super young team with only one DP. Like I said, Santi Rodriguez not with the team anymore, their main chance creator. And though they still have Maxi Morales and Alonso Martinez, it's only in bursts and strides. And against LAFC, I just don't know how they find a way to even score here. LAFC has been locked down so far with 2 1-0 wins at home. They haven't really been very convincing, and Giroud still is not fitting into the system. And I hope Abobasi continues to start when it comes to their best attacking potential. But yeah, LAFC makes it hard for teams. They find their chances in the break. It hasn't always been the prettiest in the past half season of last season and to start this season, but I just don't see NYCFC troubling them all that much. It's another long trip to start the season, first in Miami, now to LA. I'm going to go for a 2-0 win for LAFC. I think they continue to show their home dominance. San Diego, after upsetting the Galaxy in its first ever match, gets to host St. Louis City in its first ever home match in existence. And we're the schedule makers trying to tell us something, because the only 2 teams to win their first ever game as an expansion side were these 2 teams. And San Diego was the second, St. Louis the first a couple years back. Maybe we should have been paying a little bit more attention when they made this schedule, because now these 2 teams go at it. And it's an interesting matchup. San Diego, first ever home game. St. Louis City, a disappointing draw at home to the Rapids last week. 0-0. They created 2 expected goals, though. Didn't even allow a shot on target. So that's a promising sign for them, especially for a team that was also one of the worst road teams last season in terms of allowing goals. And I think they only had about 3 wins on the road, if that. Maybe even like 1. I might be confusing them with Dallas. But under Melberg, I still want to see just another game or 2, especially with Teicher now actually playing. He missed the first game, one of their star German attackers. I really want to see another game or 2 to see what the St. Louis team will really look like under Melberg, despite the fact that they obviously have that same attacking talent from last season. But for San Diego, will they open up a little bit more? Will they be a little bit more expansive and direct and cater to the fact that they are playing their home opener, want to put on a show for the crowd? Will it be a little bit less controlled for San Diego? And I still want to see San Diego against a real team, in the sense that they have it all figured out. They have their actual full roster healthy and set. And maybe against St. Louis, that still might not be it, because although they are healthy and have Teicher back, it's still a different probably system under Melberg. And against the Galaxy, obviously we've talked about how they were missing so many players. It wasn't really their full-strength squad, and obviously that's no excuse or not to take away from San Diego, but I'd still like to see them, how they handle, obviously, across this season, more full strength teams with obvious and clear ideas and how this team looks against those types of teams. But still going to be an interesting matchup. I don't know what to expect. Honestly, this is going to be a very interesting match. But I think with Tiker back, St. Louis City definitely has a chance to steal a point here. And they looked very, very, comfortable and controlled, and were unlucky to only get a draw in that game against the Rapids. I think this might be a bit of a challenge for San Diego, despite the attacking potential they have. And if they do leave themselves a little bit more open, we could see goals on both sides. I say 1-1, maybe 2-2, but I'm going to go with 1-1. I see a draw in this game. We move on to Sunday's slate, which is, of course, 2 games. The first of those being the Whitecaps hosting the Galaxy, with both of these teams dealing with some Champions Cup fixtures, whether that be before or after. The Whitecaps currently, at the time of this recording, are the only team left to wrap up the round of 32 tie. They go into the second leg down 2-1, and they play that one at home against Saprissa. So we'll see what happens. If they were to go through, then they would play the first leg of the round of 16 at home. So that would mean, back-to-back home games, so they don't have to travel anyways or worry about traveling after this game. Meanwhile, the Galaxy got a bye into the round of 16, so they didn't have to deal with a couple extra games before this, but they do have to travel for their next first leg after this game to Herediano, which I believe is a Costa Rican team that RSL just lost to, and so that is going to be on their minds, kind of a look-ahead situation. But at the same time, I don't really know where their concentration lies, because I don't know if they really are expecting to go that far in Champions Cup with the current state of the roster, with all the injuries. And at the same time, I don't really like their chances in this game anyways, because they were completely outclassed against San Diego, and they're really going to have to figure out what their identity is this season, at least until Paintsel gets back, because this personnel just doesn't fit that same style that won them MLS Cup last season. And so it's a lot of question marks about this Galaxy side, and they just have been absolutely terrible on the road under Vanny, despite obviously going undefeated at home last season. And so I think all the odds are stacked against them here, even though the Whitecaps will have this extra game before this one against Saprissa. But still, the Whitecaps looked super impressive against Portland, which I don't want to overreact to at the same time, because I did have the Whitecaps, missing the playoffs. I do think they have a high floor, just not a high ceiling. But if Jaden Nelson plays like he did against the Timbers and is consistent to that level, well, then their ceiling just really, really raised. And no one was really expecting that level. But still, that is Portland, who is dealing with so many issues, so I don't want to overreact. But still, I think at home here, the Whitecaps have a clear advantage on this artificial playing field they have, and I just don't think it's going to be too much of a problem for them. And the Galaxy have far more question marks at the moment, and so I see the Whitecaps winning this one 2-1. The final match of Week 2 slate is Sunday Night Soccer. This week it's between the Dynamo and Inter Miami in Houston. The Dynamo lost their home opener to Dallas. Meanwhile, Miami drew to NYCFC 2-2 after going down a man very, very early, but clawed their way back after going down 2-1. They also advanced to the Champions Cup round of 16, beat Kansas City easily, and then they face Cavalier in the first leg of the round of 16 at home. So they have been traveling back and forth, but after this game, they don't have to, travel to Cavalier. They get to go back home. But they are dealing with a lot of congestion anyways, and this is, to me, still, I think, a very thin roster. And also the fact that Pico is out, another attacking option on that left wing, so we're probably going to see Allende start again. They did play Tuesday, though, so they do have enough rest, I think, ahead of this match to not have to really worry about that. And Cavalier is not that, probably one of the weaker opponents they'll face, or that they could have drawn in this bracket. So really don't have to look too far ahead, I think, and they could still focus on this game. The thing is, though, on the road, and just in general, to me, this Miami defense still didn't really get much better, in my opinion. Like I said, I think they have crazy discipline issues and are not really locked in for 90 minutes at a time. And on the road, they, are not a lock at all to keep a clean sheet. Meanwhile, the Dynamo in general, with their style, really aren't a lock for goals. So it's two conflicting kind of teams. Miami's usually pretty much good for goals on both sides of things. And the Dynamo are looking to bounce back from really a terrible year at home after being really good at home the season prior, and then now another loss at home to start this season. I think this one might be a really high scoring game. It's hard to pick a side though with Miami's congestion and Dynamo's really lack of true killers minus Ponce. But I think they still won't have really much problem attacking this Miami team and getting their own, converting on their own chances with Aviles as well out on that red card. But I'm going to go with Miami to maybe pull this one out. I'm leaning 3-2 for Miami. That might sound very high scoring. That's just what I'm feeling. For any types of bets, Miami games are pretty much a lock for goals. Any way you split it, almost 95% of the time. That's just how it goes. And in Houston, I think they're going to have some trouble of their own, but I'm still going to lean for them to win this one and actually produce a pretty back and forth game compared to last week's Sunday Night Soccer, where San Diego made it very, very boring for the neutral viewer, let's just put it that way, and completely control that game. I think this one will be very back and forth, and Miami comes out on top 3-2. Thanks for tuning in. Let me know what your favorite picks and predictions are for week 2 of MLS action. Make sure to like the video if you haven't already and subscribe to the channel as well. And I'll see you all in the next video.